General Hospital spoilers for the next 2 weeks, July 21st to August 1st, reveal that the wedding that was meant to symbolize a new beginning for Willow has turned into the darkest chapter of her life. A catastrophic unraveling that exposes not only Drew's betrayal but also the fragile threads holding her sanity together. What was supposed to be a moment of joy quickly transforms into a public humiliation when the truth about Drew's deception comes to light, his affair with Nina, his manipulations, and his carefully hidden lies. Every vow he spoke now feels poisoned, every promise shattered. In that moment, as the whispers and gasps ripple through the room, Willow's world collapses. The pain is immediate and brutal, cutting deeper than any wound she has ever experienced. It's not just the heartbreak that destroys her, it's the realization that she built her future on a man who never truly valued her trust, who betrayed her while pretending to be her savior. The rage and despair that overwhelm Willow in that moment mark the beginning of a terrifying transformation. She has endured so much loss, her illness, her strained relationships, her desperate attempts to build a family, and this betrayal is the final breaking point. No longer the soft, forgiving woman she once was, Willow becomes consumed by darkness. A force that begins to twist her grief into something dangerous and unpredictable. Her mind, clouded by heartbreak and humiliation, begins to unravel, leading her to believe that the only way to regain control of her shattered life is to take back what she believes is rightfully hers. The love she feels for her children, Daisy, Wiley, and Amelia, morphs into an obsession, an uncontrollable drive to protect them from the chaos that Drew and Michael represent. She convinces herself that the children will never be safe unless they are with her and her alone. This dangerous shift sets the stage for a shocking and chaotic plan. In her state of emotional collapse, Willow starts to plot the unthinkable, kidnapping Daisy, Wiley, and Amelia. She believes she is rescuing them from a toxic environment. But the reality is that her spiraling mental state is pushing her toward disaster. The same woman who once fought to build a stable, loving family is now prepared to tear everything apart to feel in control again. Her determination grows stronger each day, fueled by her anger toward Drew, her distrust of Michael, and her resentment of Nina, whose presence is like salt in an open wound. What makes this impending disaster even more dangerous is how carefully Willow begins to plan it. Beneath the appearance of a grieving, broken bride, she is quietly calculating her moves. She knows the schedules of the children, the weaknesses and the security around the Quartermain estate, and the moments when Michael and Drew are most distracted. Every detail becomes part of her dark obsession. Friends and family start to notice changes in her behavior, her erratic mood swings, the way she avoids conversations, and the cold, detached tone in her voice. But no one realizes how close she is to crossing the line until it's almost too late. As this dark plan forms, the chaos around her only intensifies. Drew, desperate to save face after the scandal at the wedding, tries to manipulate public perception and win Willow back, not out of love but out of pride. His attempts to control the narrative only push Willow further away, feeding her belief that everyone around her is lying or trying to control her. Michael, caught in the crossfire between loyalty to his sister and his mistrust of Drew, becomes increasingly protective of Wiley, which only deepens Willow's fear that she will lose her children forever. The stage is set for a disaster that no one in Port Charles will see coming. Willow's unraveling is no longer just a personal tragedy, it is a ticking time bomb that threatens to destroy every relationship and family tie around her. When she finally acts on her plan to take the children, the entire town will be thrown into chaos. The Quartermains, the Corinthos family, and even the police will scramble to bring the situation under control, but Willow, driven by her delusions and her unshakable belief that she is doing the right thing, will not go down easily. This new, darker version of Willow is unpredictable, a woman transformed by pain into something almost unrecognizable. The once gentle and forgiving mother has become someone capable of desperate and dangerous actions, someone who believes that love can justify anything, even kidnapping. Her story is no longer about healing or redemption. It's about the destructive power of betrayal and how one devastating moment can turn a life of hope into a spiral of madness. The fallout from this disaster will be felt by everyone in Port Charles, as Willow's actions threatened to tear apart not only her own family but the fragile alliances that hold the town together. The moment Liesel received the confirmation, her knees nearly gave out. It wasn't just a rumor this time. The whispers she had ignored, the shadows in the corridors, the encrypted messages, the blurred photographs, all had led to this singular truth: Britt was alive. Or at least, something wearing Britt's face was walking again. For Liesel, who had mourned, grieved, and screamed her soul dry in the aftermath of her daughter's death, the revelation wasn't relief, it was terror. Because deep down, in the hollow pit where motherly instinct meets clinical expertise, Liesel sensed something was deeply, irrevocably wrong. Britt had always been complex, brilliant, cynical, emotionally guarded but tender in secret. The woman who now stood before cameras and intelligence reports bore none of those markers. Her gait was precise, military. Her face was eerily still, like it had been molded into a perpetual half-expression. And the eyes, those familiar eyes, were devoid of history, lacking the torment and resilience that had made Britt who she was. To everyone else, this was a resurrection. But to Liesel, it was desecration. Behind the curtain of secrecy and misdirection, the truth unfolded like a nightmare scripted by a madman. Victor Cassadine, presumed dead but likely very much alive, had never truly given up on his obsession with control, legacy, and chaos. Using the scientific backing of Professor Henry Dalton, a geneticist once shunned for his theories on human cloning, Victor had devised a plan so insane that only in the twisted underworld of Port Charles could it find fertile ground. Britt's genetic material, stolen or preserved during her previous treatments, had become the foundation for an experiment that blurred the lines between science and sacrilege. The result was a perfect replica, an exact clone physically, but stripped of everything that made Britt human. To Liesel, the horror was layered. Not only had Victor robbed her of the dignity of mourning a child, he had twisted that child's image into a tool of manipulation. Dalton, the brilliant but morally bankrupt scientist, had been the architect. But Liesel's own fingerprints were not entirely absent. In her darkest hours, she'd whispered to herself, what if she could bring Britt back? What if death didn't have to be the end? And in those whispers, perhaps she had unknowingly invited this monstrosity into being. Now, this new Britt walked among the living, a vessel without memories, a construct without empathy. She did not flinch at family photos, did not smile at familiar voices, did not grieve her own death. She was programmed, methodical, and disturbingly obedient. For Jason Morgan, the man who had once held Britt in her final hours, the sight of her doppelganger was almost too much to bear. He watched her from the shadows, tracking her movements across Europe, following reports of strange behavior, of a woman with no past, who seemed to have emerged from nowhere. Every time he tried to make contact, she vanished, as if someone, or something, was one step ahead. Jason's mind, usually a fortress of discipline, now teetered on the edge. He replayed every moment he had shared with Britt, desperate to find something, some anomaly, that might explain this madness. But what haunted him more was the possibility that if this wasn't Britt, then where was the real one? Had she been alive this whole time, trapped in some lab, her identity drained and replaced? Or had her corpse been raided, desecrated to create a mockery of life? Either way, Jason felt responsible. If he had acted sooner, if he had followed the strange reports when they first surfaced, maybe he could have stopped this abomination. Port Charles remained unaware of the storm brewing beyond its borders. But the undercurrents had begun to seep in. Sonny, forever the kingpin of secrets, had caught wind of a Cassadine movement in Eastern Europe. Carly had noticed Jason's increased absence, his silence stretched thin with obsession. Even Anna, normally poised and measured, had started pulling old WSB files, her instincts tingling with unease. Back in Europe, the clone, referred to in hidden reports as Subject B13, was beginning to show signs of deviation. While Victor and Dalton had programmed her to follow precise parameters, some neurological feedback was triggering fragments of unassigned behavior. She lingered too long in front of children. She stared at reflections as if trying to understand something just out of reach. She hesitated before missions, touched her chest where a necklace might once have been. The blank slate was cracking. Victor saw it as a flaw. Dalton saw it as evolution. Liesel saw it as hope. And Jason saw it as a countdown. As the situation escalated, Victor made a dangerous decision. He planned to reintroduce the new Brit to Port Charles, disguised as a returnee with amnesia. The narrative was rehearsed. She had survived a tragic accident, lost all memory, undergone treatment abroad. People would welcome her back, even if cautiously. But Jason was having none of it. He warned Carly, he warned Anna, he even considered going public. Yet every move he made was countered by Victor's vast web of influence. News outlets stayed quiet. Witnesses recanted. Medical records vanished. It was as if the universe was folding itself to allow this fiction to live. Then came the turning point. The real Brit, barely alive, emaciated. Her mind ravaged but intact, was discovered in an underground facility during a covert WSB raid. Liesel collapsed upon seeing her daughter's body, still breathing, still fighting. The clone was no longer just an ethical debate, it was a usurper. Jason now faced an impossible choice. If the clone was destroyed, would it mean killing a sentient being, however artificial? If it was spared, what did that mean for the real Brit's future, for her identity, for her place in a world that had already begun rewriting her story? Victor, realizing his plans were unraveling, set the final stage. He deployed Subject B-13 not as a daughter or a pawn, but as a weapon. Her new mission, eliminate Jason Morgan. She accepted the order without flinching. But when the moment came, when Jason stood before her, unarmed, exhausted, but resolute, something inside her shifted. A memory? A glitch? Or a ghost? The gun shook in her hand. Jason didn't move. She lowered the weapon. And somewhere deep in the labyrinth of corrupted memories, a single tear slid down the synthetic cheek of a woman who should have never lived, and yet could no longer be erased. Sasha had always been a woman shaped by loss, sculpted by pain, refined by every betrayal and heartbreak that had etched its mark across the years she had spent trying to rebuild a version of herself that could still stand tall despite everything crumbling around her. But nothing, not even the death of her husband Brando or the tragic loss of her child, could have prepared her for the soul-shattering confirmation that Robert was truly gone. In her heart, she had feared it, sensed something wrong for weeks, perhaps even longer, as she noticed the subtle yet undeniable changes in the way he moved, spoke, breathed, as if something essential was missing. As if a core part of his spirit had quietly been extinguished, leaving behind a hollow imitation of the man she once clung to as family. And now, as truth clawed its way to the surface and the curtain finally dropped, the confirmation struck her like a dagger: Robert was dead. The man she had reconnected with in France. The man who had been a surprising but welcome thread of familial comfort in a life torn by instability, had not been who she believed. The horror of it all was not only in the fact that he had died, but in the chilling reality that someone, or something, had worn his face, his voice, his presence, as if he were nothing but a tool in a far larger game Sasha had never agreed to play. The betrayal ran deeper than words, and it didn't matter who had orchestrated it, whether it had been Victor, Liesel, or some other puppeteer in the shadows. What mattered was that Sasha had been used, manipulated, and lied to in a moment when she was most vulnerable, when she had dared to believe that perhaps life was offering her a second chance at connection, at family, at peace. The news, delivered in whispers and coded messages between those who thought she deserved to know, detonated within her with terrifying force, and Port Charles, once a city of resilience and rebuilding, became suffocating. Every street, every corridor of General Hospital, every familiar voice became a ghost, a reminder of what was now undeniably lost. It was not merely grief Sasha felt, it was obliteration. She began to vanish in plain sight. Her public appearances dwindled. She stopped responding to calls, to texts, to visits from those who still cared and tried, in their limited way, to keep her tethered to the world she had fought so hard to rejoin. But Sasha was no longer fighting. She was retreating. Not from responsibility or relapse, but from the unbearable knowledge that everyone she allowed herself to love had been taken from her, one by one, as if by design. And this time, there were no tears. No outbursts. No breakdowns to interpret. Just silence. A void expanding where a heartbeat should have been. People around her began to notice the emptiness in her eyes. The stiffness in her movements, the way she seemed to drift rather than walk, as though her soul had already started to leave her body before she had physically followed. But by the time they understood, it was too late. One morning, without notice, she was gone. No note. No message. No goodbye. Her home was left pristine, untouched. Her belongings neatly arranged as if she'd simply stepped out for a moment. But she hadn't. Sasha Gilmore had made a decision not even she fully understood, a decision to disappear. Not because she wanted to die, but because she no longer knew how to live in a world that kept stealing everything that mattered to her. The city of Port Charles barely had time to react before rumors took hold. Some speculated she'd gone back to France, to walk the same streets she had once walked with Robert, hoping to make peace with the ghost of a lie. Others believed she had checked herself into a clinic somewhere far away, to escape the eyes that kept expecting her to heal when all she wanted was to forget. But the most painful theory was the one no one dared to say aloud. That Sasha had finally succumbed not to addiction, or madness, or violence, but to despair. That the woman who had survived so much had finally decided she no longer wanted to survive. And while Port Charles continued to spin, while Drew's manipulations and Mina's schemes and Sunny's vendettas raged on, there remained an empty seat at the table, a missing face in the halls. A name left unsaid in conversations too painful to finish. Carly tried to speak of her once, to bring her up casually, but her voice cracked and she stopped. Brooke Lynn had taken to keeping Sasha's last voicemail saved on her phone, playing it late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Michael stared at Daisy's drawings and saw the sadness in the child's colors, wondering if she somehow felt the absence even without words to name it. Sasha had been more than just another broken soul in a town full of them. She had been a symbol of what it meant to claw your way back from the edge, to stitch yourself back together despite the odds. Her disappearance, quiet and deliberate, was a wound not just to those who loved her, but to the city itself, a painful reminder that even the strongest sometimes cannot carry their burden forever. Whether she would return remained a question without an answer. But for now, her absence was its own kind of presence, haunting the people and places she had touched with a ghostly permanence. And perhaps that was the most heartbreaking part of all. Sasha was still everywhere, even when she was nowhere to be found. Of course. Here's a long-form immersive narrative in English, approximate 10,000 characters, expanding on Rocco's descent into obsession and the unrelenting shadow of his family's legacy. Rocco had always been a quiet observer. The kind of child who absorbed the moods of a room before speaking, the kind whose eyes lingered longer than necessary, as if collecting evidence rather than simply existing in the moment. At first, his silence was mistaken for thoughtfulness. It was Lulu who believed he took after Dante in that way, a contemplative soul, measured, slow to trust. But what no one could foresee was how deeply that silence would curdle into something else. Into suspicion. Into calculation. Into a thirst for the truth that would eventually unravel the fragile line between child and force of nature. Port Charles was a town steeped in secrets. And Rocco had grown up beneath the weight of unspoken things. He had felt them long before he understood them, felt them in the way his mother's voice caught when she spoke of Cassidine's. In the haunted look in Dante's eyes whenever the subject of Victor came up, in the heavy silences that followed family gatherings where Britt's name was mentioned like a wound still bleeding. He learned early that what was not said mattered more than what was spoken aloud. And so, in the silence of his own heart, Rocco began piecing together a puzzle no one knew he was building. As the years passed, it wasn't just silence he mastered, it was control. Emotional control, environmental control, informational control. Rocco became obsessed with order. Not for peace of mind but for the security that came from knowing more than others. He started keeping journals, not of his feelings, but of facts. He memorized conversations, cross-referenced stories, and searched through old photographs and documents in the privacy of late nights when the house was asleep. He began mapping connections between names: Albrecht, Victor, Britt, Jason, Sonny, Sidwell. He wasn't just curious, he was driven. And that drive was no longer about understanding the past. It was about owning it, reconstructing it, weaponizing it. What haunted Rocco most was not the dead, but the lies told in their names. Britt had once been a distant memory, an adult who came and went in stories, always on the periphery of tragedy. But when whispers began to surface, rumors of her return, of her survival through cloning or manipulation, Rocco fixated on her like a thread unraveling the entire tapestry of his family's narrative. If Britt was alive, who had buried the truth? And more importantly, what else had they buried with it? It was in this mental space of fractured reality and creeping paranoia that Rocco transformed from inquisitive to unhinged. He began testing boundaries, emotional ones, intellectual ones, even physical ones. He would provoke Dante with subtle questions, trap Lulu in corners with strange observations. Test their reactions to names like Liesel and Victor just to observe the flicker of fear or guilt behind their eyes. He no longer sought their affection, he wanted their admissions, their confessions. And when they failed to give them, he turned to darker methods. There was something chilling in the way Rocco began isolating himself, not as an act of teenage rebellion, but as a calculated rejection of falsehoods. He stopped attending therapy sessions, insisting he no longer needed help. He withdrew from friends, convinced they were distractions from his mission. The journals multiplied. He began encrypting them. And somewhere in the blur of grief and obsession, Rocco began believing he was the only one who could save Port Charles from the rot that ran through its veins. What made Rocco dangerous was not just his intelligence, but his ability to mimic empathy. He could make people feel understood, heard, and safe, only to dissect them later, like subjects in an experiment. Teachers adored him. Counselors trusted him. His grandparents were proud of him. But none of them saw the rooms he had locked behind closed doors, rooms filled with charts, timelines, copied files from Dante's old cases, and theories that twisted truth until it served his purpose. In Rocco's mind, every lie was a sin, and every sin needed to be exposed. When he uncovered Dante's role in a long-buried cover-up involving an old Cassadine incident, something in Rocco snapped. It wasn't just the betrayal of a father, it was the realization that no adult was innocent. Not his mother. Not his father. Not the doctors at General Hospital, nor the officers at the PCPD. Everyone had something to hide. And if they wouldn't reveal it willingly, he would force their hands. One by one. He started small. Hints dropped into the school system about unethical practices. Anonymous letters sent to local journalists, spurring them to reopen cold cases. Leaks to online forums about Victor's connection to a missing child. Then the bolder moves began. He sent coded threats to Sonny's penthouse, nothing overt, just enough to make Sonny uncomfortable. He left false evidence in Jason's path. Then watched as the man followed it like a bloodhound to nowhere. And all the while, Rocco sat at the center of the storm, smiling. Dante and Lulu finally caught on too late. By the time they confronted him, Rocco had already secured enough psychological leverage to turn their lives into a chess game. He knew about Lulu's blackout episodes, her therapy visits. He knew about Dante's guilt over the Brit situation and his brief, hidden alliance with Curtis years ago. He didn't need to expose them. All he needed to do was remind them that he knew. And that he could. The tragedy of Rocco wasn't that he became a villain. It was that he believed he was the cure. In a world poisoned by secrets and shadows, he thought he was light. The Avenger. The truth-bearer. But the light he carried burned too hot, too bright, and it scorched everything in its path, including the people who loved him. And as Port Charles braced itself for yet another storm, no one realized that the most dangerous legacy of all wasn't Victor's manipulations or Jason's violence or Liesl's science. It was the quiet boy who had learned too well how to listen, and had decided the only way to heal was to destroy. And so the question remains, who will stop Rocco? Or has the damage already been done? Has the past passed too much of itself into him? Or is there still time to pull him back from the edge before the child they all failed becomes the monster they all created?